Welcome to Hidden Wounds. My name is Arthur Sinclair, and I laid my wife to rest while she wore her favorite sapphire blue gown. Allow me to elaborate. I didn't insist on that gown to create a spectacle or draw attention. I chose it because it was the color Eleanor loved most, because it was a vibrant reminder to everyone in that chapel that I was still here, breathing, and very much alive. And, I admit, I chose it because I knew it would profoundly irritate my son, Daniel, and his manipulative wife, Brittany, who had viewed me as little more than a roadblock to their inheritance for the last 5 years. At 61, I've come to understand that sorrow doesn't need to render you powerless. Sometimes it can make you formidable. The service was precisely what Eleanor would have wished for: tasteful, quiet, and attended by the city's most distinguished figures. Eleanor Sinclair had built her philanthropic empire from a small family foundation, transforming it into a 55 million force for good that supported art museums, university scholarships, and community developments that most could only imagine. I stood near the front of the church, receiving condolences with the practiced composure of a man who had been prepared for this duty. 32 years of marriage to a remarkable woman teaches you poise, how to offer a reassuring smile through your own anguish, and how to project an aura of strength even when your personal world has been shattered. "Arthur, my dear, you're handling this with such dignity," whispered Helen Sinclair, a prominent figure in the city's social scene. "Eleanor would be so very proud of the strength you're showing." "Thank you, Helen," I replied softly. Eleanor always believed that life must be embraced by those still living. But even as I performed the role of the dignified widower, my gaze was continually drawn to Daniel and Brittany. They lingered near the back of the church, like crows waiting for an opportunity. Daniel, my 38-year-old son, had been gifted his mother's sharp intellect, but none of her compassion. He wore his grief like an oversized coat, awkward and unconvincing. Brittany, blonde and striking in a way that some find captivatingly ruthless, checked her phone repeatedly between feigned moments of sorrow. They thought I was oblivious, but I observed every hushed exchange, every calculating look that passed between them. During the eulogy, as the minister spoke of Eleanor's legacy of kindness and community service, I saw Brittany lean in and whisper something to Daniel that made a smirk flicker across his lips. After the burial, as the mourners convened at my estate for the reception, I was the consummate host. I moved from room to room, acknowledging their sympathies, recounting fond memories of Eleanor, and making certain that every guest felt welcome. It was what Eleanor would have wanted, and more critically, it was the image of control I needed them to see. I was in the kitchen giving instructions to the caterers when I heard Daniel's voice from the connecting hall. He was talking to someone, likely Brittany, in that low, assured tone he always used when he believed he was being astute. "Don't count on a penny from Mom's 55 million, he said, the smugness in his voice unmistakable. "He's been coasting on her achievements for decades. It's our time now." I stood motionless, a heavy crystal tumbler in my hand that suddenly felt like it weighed a ton. "We hold the reins now," Brittany's voice followed, laced with an entitlement that sent a chill through me. "He can play the grieving husband all he wants, but the real influence transfers to us." At last, I placed the glass down on the counter, my hand perfectly steady despite the inferno of rage igniting in my chest. For 5 years, since Daniel had married Brittany, I'd witnessed my son morph from the caring young man I had raised into this cold, opportunistic stranger. I had watched Brittany's influence poison his character, turning him against me with clever manipulations and overt avarice. But to hear them discussing my wife's fortune, my life's partnership with Eleanor, as if it were already theirs, while her memory was still so fresh, was the final straw. At that moment, I resolved that if Daniel wanted a battle, I would give him one fought with strategy, precision, and utter devastation. I returned to the reception, my posture erect and my smile impeccable. I received more condolences, shared more anecdotes, and flawlessly played the part of the sorrowful yet resilient widower. But inwardly, something had solidified into a diamond-hard resolve. Eleanor used to say that the most formidable adversary is the one who maintains a pleasant smile while plotting your downfall. She had taught me everything about strategy, about understanding people, and about the virtue of tactical patience. My son was about to discover that his father had been a very attentive student. "Arthur, how are you bearing up?" It was Lawrence Hayes, Eleanor's long-standing attorney and one of our most trusted family friends. Lawrence was in his 70s, with a full head of silver hair and keen eyes that bespoke a legal acumen that had been instrumental in helping Eleanor build her foundation. "I know this is a difficult time, but I imagine we'll need to address the practical details soon." "Of course, Lawrence. Whenever you're ready." "Eleanor's will is quite clear," he continued, "but we should still meet this week to review everything. There are a few specific provisions she wanted me to discuss with you in private." I noted the subtle weight he placed on the word specific and mentally bookmarked it. Lawrence had been Eleanor's confidant for over 25 years. If any person knew the complete details of my wife's final wishes, it would be him. "I would appreciate that. Perhaps Tuesday afternoon?" "Perfect." "And Arthur," Lawrence lowered his voice, "Eleanor was exceptionally meticulous about safeguarding your future. I believe you will find her arrangements to be more than satisfactory." As the evening drew to a close and guests started to depart, Daniel and Brittany approached me by the front door. Daniel had loosened his tie and seemed anxious to leave, while Brittany held fast to her facade of somber propriety. "Dad," Daniel began, his tone carefully measured, "we just wanted to see how you were doing before we go. This must all be so much to handle." "I'm managing, son. Your mother and I prepared for this day, even as we prayed it would never arrive." Brittany moved closer, her expression a mask of concern that was almost convincing if you didn't know her. "Arthur, we just want you to know we're here for you. Whatever you need, any decisions that need to be made about the estate, we're here to help." The word help was delivered with just enough emphasis to betray her true intent. They weren't offering support, they were positioning for a takeover. "That's very kind of you," I replied evenly, "though I suspect Eleanor's arrangements will take care of most things. She was always so thorough." Daniel's gaze sharpened. "What do you mean, arrangements?" "Oh, just the standard estate matters. Wills, trusts, the usual. Nothing you need to trouble yourselves with at the moment." I offered a warm smile, projecting the image of a man grateful for his son's concern, but naive about the intricacies of high finance. Brittany and Daniel exchanged a fleeting look, the kind shared between conspirators who believe their subtlety is undetectable. "Well," Brittany said, "we just want to make sure you're not overwhelmed with choices you shouldn't have to face by yourself. Financial affairs can be so daunting." "How thoughtful. But I am confident Lawrence will walk me through it all." Eleanor trusted him implicitly. After they had gone, I walked through the silent house. Our house, the home Eleanor and I had created together over 3 decades. Every room was saturated with memories, every object held a story. But now, the space also echoed with my son's words. "Don't count on a penny from Mom's. 55 million. I poured a glass of Eleanor's preferred single malt scotch and sat in her study, enveloped by the books, accolades, and photographs that narrated her extraordinary life. On her desk, exactly where she had left it, was a framed picture of Daniel at his college graduation 12 years prior. The young man in that photo bore no resemblance to the calculating opportunist who had just departed my home. But that young man was no more, supplanted by someone who viewed his father not as the man who had loved and guided him for 38 years, but as an obstacle to his inheritance. I lifted my glass in a silent tribute to my wife's memory and to the lesson Daniel was about to learn about underestimating the wrong man. The game was afoot, and I was determined to win. The morning following the funeral, I awoke in the master bedroom I had shared with Eleanor for 32 years, and the silence was a crushing weight. No soft breathing from her side of the bed, no sound of pages turning from the sitting area where she always enjoyed her first cup of tea, no gentle hum from the shower as she readied herself for another day of changing the world. But rather than succumbing to grief, I found my thoughts fixated on Daniel's words. "It's our time now." Where did I go wrong? When had my affectionate, thoughtful boy transformed into this callous stranger who schemed about his inheritance while his mother's memory was still so fresh? I knew precisely when. It began the day he married Brittany, 5 years ago. Daniel had always been ambitious. That was the Sinclair way. Eleanor had taught him the value of diligence, education, and creating something of substance. Daniel had earned his MBA, diligently worked his way through various departments at Sinclair Consolidated, and appeared genuinely dedicated to understanding the business from its foundations. Then Brittany entered the picture. She was stunning, I'll concede that. Tall and elegant with champagne blonde hair, sharp blue eyes, and a sophisticated flair that commanded attention at fundraising galas and board dinners. When Daniel first introduced us 6 years ago, I made every effort to welcome her. She was sharp, well-educated, and came from a respectable family. At first glance, she seemed to be the perfect match for my son. But there were subtle indicators, small things, that triggered my paternal instincts with a sense of disquiet. The way her eyes would catalog the value of everything in our home, the questions she would pose about Eleanor's business, always masked as innocent curiosity but digging for precise financial data. The methodical way she started to distance Daniel from his longtime friends, his college companions, and even some of our extended family. "Dad, Brittany thinks we dwell too much on the past," Daniel had said during one of our weekly dinners, about 3 years into their relationship. "She says I need to concentrate on forging my own legacy instead of just being in Mom's shadow." At the time, I thought it might be beneficial for Daniel to assert his own identity, but Brittany's idea of independence seemed to involve severing ties with anyone who knew Daniel before her arrival. The wedding was a magnificent 300-0 spectacle that Eleanor had funded without a second thought. Brittany had demanded the most lavish venue, the most intricate floral arrangements, the most exclusive caterer. Every detail was flawless, and every detail was paid for with someone else's money. "She has expensive preferences," Eleanor had commented to me during the reception, as we watched Brittany instruct the photographer on capturing her custom-made gown from every possible angle. "She loves Daniel," I had said, trying to reassure myself as much as her. "That's what's important." But Eleanor had given me one of her perceptive looks, the same one she wore when assessing a high-stakes deal. "Love and ambition are not always the same thing, my dear," she'd said. How prophetic she was. After the wedding, the shifts in Daniel's behavior became more obvious. The weekly family dinners became monthly, then infrequent. The long phone conversations about his life and aspirations dwindled into brief, obligatory check-ins. When Brittany resigned from her marketing position 8 months after they were married, stating she wanted to devote herself to supporting Daniel's career, I should have recognized the warning sign. Instead, Daniel began to work longer hours, assuming more responsibility at Sinclair Consolidated, positioning himself as Eleanor's heir apparent. But his motivation had changed. Where Eleanor had built the business from a true passion for innovation and community betterment, Daniel seemed driven solely by a desire for wealth and prestige. "I want to steer us toward venture philanthropy," Daniel had declared at a family dinner 2 years ago. "High risk, high reward social startups. The potential impact is massive." "And the risk of failure?" Eleanor had inquired gently. "That's the exciting part. Big risks, big rewards, right?" Brittany had beamed at him, as if he'd discovered a cure for a major disease. "Daniel's vision is so forward-thinking. He's going to elevate Sinclair Consolidated to heights you never even considered." The subtle jab at Eleanor's achievements was not lost on me, and I saw my wife's jaw clench almost imperceptibly. But she held her tongue, opting to let Daniel learn from his own experiences rather than stifling his drive with criticism. The true turning point came 8 months ago when Eleanor was diagnosed with a cardiac condition that would eventually take her life. The prognosis had been cautiously hopeful. With the right treatment and lifestyle adjustments, she might have had several more years. But the diagnosis unleashed something ugly in Daniel and Brittany. They started to hover, asking intrusive questions about estate planning and suggesting that Eleanor ought to simplify her affairs to make things easier on me when the time came. Brittany had even patronizingly offered to help me grasp the financial aspects, since I'd never had to manage such matters on my own. The condescension was staggering. I had been Eleanor's partner in every sense, involved in every major decision, serving on the boards of her charities, and using my own network to forge relationships crucial to her success. But, in Brittany's version of reality, I was merely the supportive husband who needed to be shielded from the harsh complexities of the world. The final affront occurred just 3 weeks before Eleanor passed. Daniel suggested that perhaps it was time for his mother to step down from the active leadership of the company. "You're not getting any younger, Mom," Daniel had said during what would be our last family dinner together. "Maybe it's time to start passing the torch to the next generation." Eleanor had observed her son for a long moment before she answered. "Are you asking me to retire, Daniel?" "I'm suggesting we plan for what's coming. You've built an incredible legacy, but it needs a successor. I want to ensure Sinclair Consolidated continues to flourish for generations. And you believe you're prepared for that?" "I know I am." The conversation ended there, but I saw a change in Eleanor's eyes. For the first time, she was looking at Daniel, not just as her beloved son, but as a potential danger to everything she had built. Now, sitting in our bedroom the morning after her funeral, I understood what Eleanor had seen. Daniel wasn't interested in protecting his mother's legacy. He was interested in seizing his inheritance. And Brittany wasn't just a passenger. She was the one at the wheel driving his transformation. My phone rang, breaking my somber reflection. Lawrence Hayes' name flashed on the screen. "Lawrence, good morning." "Arthur, my apologies if I'm calling too early. I was wondering if we might be able to move our meeting to this afternoon rather than Tuesday. There are some time-sensitive issues we ought to address." "Of course. Is everything all right?" "Everything is under control." But Eleanor left very specific directives about the timing of certain disclosures. "Could you be at my office around 2 o'clock? "I'll be there." After hanging up, I wondered what sort of specific directives my wife had arranged. Eleanor had always been a master planner, thinking several steps ahead in her work and in her life. Could she have foreseen the avarice I had witnessed in Daniel and Brittany? I spent the rest of the morning sifting through Eleanor's personal belongings, her clothes, her jewelry, the small keepsakes from her childhood and early career. In her bedside table drawer, I discovered a sealed envelope with my name inscribed in her elegant script. Inside was a letter, dated just a month before she died. My dearest Arthur, if you are reading this, it means my deepest fears about my health have been realized. I am so sorry I couldn't give us more time. Every day with you was a gift I never felt I truly deserved. But I must tell you that I have been observing Daniel very closely these past 2 years, and I am gravely concerned about the man he is becoming. The son we raised with so much love has been replaced by someone I can hardly recognize. Whether this is entirely Brittany's doing or something that was always dormant within him, I cannot say. But I cannot ignore what I see. I have taken steps to protect you and to teach Daniel a crucial lesson about the difference between entitlement and earning. Lawrence has all the information. Trust him without reservation. He has been helping me with this for months. You are stronger than you realize, more capable than Daniel believes, and more deserving of respect than either of them have shown you. Do not allow your grief to let you forget your own worth. I love you today, tomorrow, and for all of eternity. Eleanor. I read the letter 3 times, my vision blurred by tears. Even as she faced her own mortality, Eleanor had been focused on protecting me, on ensuring I would not be left exposed to our son's greed. Whatever plans she had made, whatever lessons she had orchestrated for Daniel, I knew they would be both brilliant and devastating. Eleanor never acted out of anger. She acted with precision, patience, and impeccable timing. As I got ready for my meeting with Lawrence, I felt a sensation I hadn't experienced since the day Eleanor died. Anticipation. My wife had left me one last gift, and I was eager to see what it was. Daniel and Brittany believed they were in control now. They had absolutely no idea what was about to unfold. The law offices of Lawrence Hayes occupied the top 3 floors of the city's most distinguished skyscraper. I had visited countless times over the years for various business dealings, but walking through those mahogany-lined halls, this particular afternoon felt different. Everything appeared the same. The oil portraits of venerable former partners, the rich Persian carpets, the shelves of leather-bound legal texts. But I was a changed man. Yesterday, I was a husband. Today, I was a widower with a mystery to unravel. Lawrence greeted me at the entrance himself, a courtesy he always extended but which now felt particularly meaningful. At 72, he moved with the deliberate grace of a man who had spent a lifetime managing other people's most critical affairs. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his suit was crisp, and his handshake was both firm and comforting. Arthur, thank you for coming on such short notice. Please, let's go to my private office. He guided me past the main reception to a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city Eleanor had so profoundly influenced. The walls were adorned with photographs of Lawrence, alongside various clients and dignitaries, including several of him and Eleanor, at groundbreaking ceremonies and charity functions that spanned more than 2 decades. Can I get you some coffee? Water? Coffee would be wonderful, thank you. As Lawrence prepared our drinks with an elaborate machine that likely cost more than a mid-sized sedan, I observed his expression. There was a glimmer of excitement in his eyes, like a man who had been holding on to a thrilling secret and was finally getting the chance to reveal it. Lawrence, I said, as he handed me a perfectly brewed cup. Eleanor's letter indicated she had been working with you on some special arrangements. What exactly did my wife have in mind? Lawrence returned to his massive oak desk and retrieved a thick file labeled with Eleanor's name. Arthur, what I am about to share with you must be held in the strictest confidence until the official will reading next week. Eleanor was adamant about the timing. Of course, your wife approached me 10 months ago. She had growing concerns about Daniel's behavior, the way he spoke about money, his assumptions regarding his inheritance, and his attitude toward you. She was especially troubled by Brittany's influence and what she perceived as Daniel's increasing sense of entitlement. I nodded, the subtle shifts I had also noticed replaying in my mind. Eleanor asked for my help in creating what we termed a teachable moment. She wanted to ensure Daniel understood the distinction between earning a reward and simply expecting it to be given to him. Lawrence opened the file and laid out several documents. The will that Daniel thinks is the final one, the one Eleanor discussed with him during their meetings about succession, was never her actual last will and testament. My coffee cup froze midway to my lips. What are you talking about? The document Daniel is aware of, the one that would have positioned him as the primary successor to Sinclair Consolidated, was essentially a decoy, a draft that Eleanor allowed Daniel to believe was the definitive version. Her true final will, the one I will read next week, is substantially different. How different? Lawrence smiled. And for the first time since Eleanor's passing, I felt a genuine spark of anticipation. Daniel will inherit precisely $1, accompanied by a letter detailing her reasons. The remainder of Eleanor's estate, the entire $55 million, the companies, the properties, everything is left to you. My hand trembled as I set my coffee cup down. Lawrence, that's astounding. But he's her son. Eleanor was very explicit in her rationale. She stated that Daniel had proven over the last 2 years that he prized wealth above family and inheritance above personal achievement. She wanted to give him a chance to demonstrate his worthiness of the family name through his own hard work, not just by his birthright. What if he challenges the will? He can certainly try, but Eleanor was masterful in this. The will is legally impenetrable. There are multiple witnesses, psychological assessments, confirming Eleanor's sound state of mind, and extensive documentation of her concerns about Daniel's character. More importantly, Lawrence produced another, even thicker folder. Eleanor kept meticulous records of Daniel's entitled behavior over the past 18 months. He opened it. Daniel's remarks about expecting his inheritance, his suggestions that Eleanor retire and cede control to him, his dismissive attitude toward your contributions to the family's success. Eleanor even made some recordings. Recordings? After her diagnosis, Eleanor started using a small recording device during family dinners and business meetings. She captured Daniel saying some very revealing things about his plans for the estate and his assumptions about your role after she was gone. I felt a mix of sorrow and vindication. My wife had seen the same disturbing changes in our son as I had, but she had been methodical in documenting them. There's more, Lawrence went on. Eleanor also orchestrated the transfer of several key assets into offshore trusts and accounts that are now entirely under your control. The house, the art collection, the yacht, the vacation homes, they all legally became yours as of yesterday. But how? Daniel and Brittany will realize something is wrong when they find they can't access any funds. That is the genius of Eleanor's plan. For the next week, until the will is read, everything will appear to be normal. The accounts remain accessible for day-to-day matters. The properties are still under the family name. Daniel and Brittany will have no idea that the fundamental ownership has shifted until I read the will in their presence. Lawrence leaned back, clearly relishing this part. Eleanor predicted that Daniel would likely start making plans, and possibly even financial commitments, immediately following the funeral, operating under the assumption of having access to unlimited funds. Every move he makes now, every plan he formulates based on a fortune he will never inherit, will only make the lesson more profound. That's diabolical. That's Eleanor. She always said the most effective lessons are learned through experiencing consequences, not by listening to lectures. I considered my son's arrogance, his casual disregard for my intelligence, and his wife's entitled demeanor. The thought of them concocting grand schemes with money they would never possess filled me with a sense of satisfaction I probably shouldn't have felt. What happens after the will is read? That will depend on Daniel and Brittany's reaction. If they accept the outcome with grace, and Daniel shows genuine remorse for his behavior, you will have full discretion to decide what level of support, if any, to offer him. If they choose to fight it, Lawrence shrugged. Well, Eleanor has equipped you with all the resources and evidence needed to defend yourself and the business. Sinclair Consolidated is now entirely yours. Over the last 6 months, Eleanor restructured everything. You are the sole owner of a company valued at approximately $35 million, with absolute authority over its management and future. The implications were breathtaking. Not only did I inherit everything, but I now held complete sway over Daniel's professional life. If he wanted to remain at Sinclair Consolidated, he would be answering to me. Lawrence, this is overwhelming. I never imagined Eleanor anticipated you would feel this way. She left you another letter, to be opened only after you learned the details of the will. Lawrence handed me a second envelope, this one sealed with red wax and marked, "For Arthur's eyes only." After the revelation, I opened it with slightly trembling hands. My darling husband, by now, Lawrence has explained the arrangements I've made. I know this must feel like an immense burden, and you are likely feeling conflicted about Daniel's inheritance. Do not. You have earned every cent of this fortune through your support, your wisdom, your social grace, and your unwavering partnership. You have been my collaborator in every meaningful way, and you deserve to be the steward of what we built together. As for Daniel, I am not punishing him out of malice. I am giving him the greatest gift I can, the chance to prove he is worthy of the Sinclair name through his own merit, not his lineage. If he is truly the man we raised him to be, he will come to understand this. If not, then we will know his true character. You are brilliant, capable, and far stronger than our son has ever acknowledged. Trust your judgment. Make decisions based on what is right, not what is easy. And remember that love sometimes demands difficult choices. Use this opportunity to build the life you desire, free from the expectations of others. You have earned that liberty. Forever yours, Eleanor. I folded the letter carefully. A complex storm of grief, gratitude, and resolve swirling within me. Eleanor had not only secured my financial future, she had given me the very tools to protect myself from our son's avarice. There is one final thing, Lawrence said quietly. Eleanor suggested that you might want to observe Daniel and Brittany's behavior over the coming week before you decide how to proceed after the will reading. What do you mean? Let them believe they have won. See how they treat you when they think you are dependent on their mercy. Observe what they do with what they perceive as their new power. Eleanor believed that a person's true nature is revealed when they think they have everything to gain and nothing to lose. The idea was both unnerving and exhilarating. For 1 week, I would have to embody the role of the helpless widower, while Daniel and Brittany exposed their true selves. But I would do it with the knowledge that I held all the power, that every act of their arrogance was leading them toward their ultimate downfall. "Will you do it?" Lawrence asked. I thought of Daniel's words at the funeral. It's our time now. I thought of Brittany's declaration that they were in charge. I thought of years of subtle slights, condescension, and greed masked as concern. "Oh yes," I said, a faint smile touching my lips. "I'll do it. But Lawrence, when this is over, I want Daniel to understand just how profoundly he underestimated me." "That," Lawrence said with evident satisfaction, "is exactly what Eleanor was hoping you would say." Leaving Lawrence's office that afternoon, I felt more alive than I had in years. For the next week, I would be an actor in the most significant performance of my life. The grieving, helpless widower, in need of his son's guidance. But beneath that facade, I would be watching, learning, and preparing for the moment Daniel and Brittany discovered they had been playing a simple game of checkers, while I, guided by my brilliant wife, was playing chess. The match was about to begin, and I was already several moves ahead. The morning after my meeting with Lawrence, I stood before my bedroom mirror, preparing for the performance of a lifetime. The composed, dignified man who had navigated his wife's funeral with such poise had to vanish. Today, I needed to become someone diminished, more vulnerable, the kind of man who would rely on his son's guidance to traverse the challenging landscape of widowhood. I selected my attire with care. A simple dark suit that was well made but not ostentatious, no flashy watch, and a somber tie. I needed to project the image of a man grappling with grief and insecurity, not one who had just discovered he was the sole heir to a $55 million fortune. Daniel called just as I was finishing my coffee. "Dad, how are you feeling this morning?" "Oh, one day at a time," I said, allowing a slight waver into my voice. "Everything just feels so overwhelming." "That's completely normal. Look, Brittany and I were thinking we could come by this afternoon and help you start going through some of Mom's things. And maybe we could discuss some of the practical matters." Practical matters. Code for. Let's start dividing up the money we're about to receive. That would be a blessing, son. I've been staring at your mother's desk all morning, and I don't even know where to begin. There are so many documents, so many accounts I don't understand. Don't you worry about any of that. Brittany is really sharp with financial details. She can help you sort through everything. The irony was almost too rich. Brittany, who had left her job shortly after marrying Daniel and hadn't worked a day in 4 years, was going to educate me on finances. Me, the man who had been Eleanor's business partner and was now the sole owner of a multi-million-dollar empire. That's so considerate of you both. I honestly don't know what I would do without you. You'll never have to find out, Dad. We're family. After the call, I spent an hour meticulously arranging Eleanor's study to appear as though I had attempted to organize her affairs, but had been quickly overcome. I spread documents across her desk, left filing cabinets partially open, and strategically placed a box of tissues on a side table. The scene had to convey a man who had tried to take charge, but soon realized he was out of his depth. Daniel and Brittany arrived precisely at 2 o'clock. Both dressed in expensive casual wear. Daniel wore designer jeans and a cashmere sweater, I recalled, giving him for Christmas 3 years ago. Brittany looked as if she were on her way to a luncheon at the country club, in designer jeans, a silk blouse, and jewelry that sparkled in the afternoon sun. "Dad, you look exhausted," Daniel said, giving me a hug that felt convincingly concerned. "Are you getting any sleep?" "Not much. The house feels so cavernous without your mother, and I keep dwelling on all the things that need to be handled, all the decisions waiting to be made." I gestured feebly towards Eleanor's study. "I made an attempt to go through her papers this morning, but it's all just so complicated." Brittany's eyes gleamed with what she likely intended as sympathetic interest. "Oh, Arthur, you shouldn't have to face that alone. Financial matters are so stressful, especially when you're grieving. I just feel so lost. Your mother always managed everything. I don't even know where to start." "Well, that's what we're here for," Daniel said, already making his way toward the study. "Mom always said family looks after family." I trailed them into Eleanor's office, observing as their eyes scanned the chaotic scene I had carefully orchestrated. Daniel went directly to the desk, his fingers tracing over the papers I had left out. "Dad, Have you spoken with Lawrence Hayes yet? About the will? Briefly. He mentioned we'd meet next week for a formal review, but Daniel, I'm so anxious about what comes next. Your mother never really walked me through the business side of things. I don't know how I'm going to manage all of this on my own. The relief that washed over their faces was almost laughable. Brittany actually broke into a smile before composing her features into a mask of appropriate concern. You won't be alone, she said, seating herself in the chair opposite Eleanor's desk as if she owned the place. We'll help you navigate everything. Do you really think you could? I mean, I know you both have your own busy lives. Dad, this is about the family legacy, Daniel said, picking up one of the financial reports I had placed on top of the stack. Mom built something extraordinary, and we have to ensure it's protected. Protected from what? Daniel glanced at Brittany before responding. Well, from poor decisions, from people who might try to exploit your grief, from complications. What kind of complications? Estate taxes, business management, investment strategies, Brittany chimed in smoothly. There are a lot of sharks out there who prey on widowers, especially wealthy ones. You need people you can trust to advise you. People like you? Exactly like us, Daniel affirmed. We know Mom's business. We understand the family's finances. And we love you. Who better to help you through this? I let my shoulders slump in a display of apparent relief. I've been so worried about making a mistake. Your mother always said I was too trusting, that I needed to be more cautious about who I listened to. Mom was right about that, Brittany said. But that's why you have us. We'll make sure no one takes advantage of you. The casual way she inserted herself into the core of my family, as if her marriage to Daniel gave her a claim to Eleanor's legacy, was audacious. But I just nodded gratefully. I can't tell you how much better that makes me feel. I was terrified I would mess everything up and tarnish your mother's memory. That's not going to happen, Daniel said with conviction. We'll make sure Mom's legacy is not only protected but expanded. In fact, I've already been thinking about some opportunities. What kind of opportunities? Daniel's eyes lit up with the familiar gleam I'd seen whenever he spoke of his grand ambitions. Well, once we have a clear picture of the estate, there are some investments I've been looking into, high-yield ventures that could substantially increase Mom's wealth. Isn't that risky? All worthwhile investments carry some risk, Dad. But I have access to some luxury real estate developments that are poised to skyrocket in value. We could double the estate's net worth in just a few years. Double it? I let my voice fill with a sense of awe. That sounds incredible, but also frightening. What if something goes wrong? Nothing is going to go wrong, Brittany said with confidence. Daniel has exceptional business instincts. He's been lining up these moves for months. Months. They had been counting Eleanor's money and plotting how to use it while she was still alive. The casual admission of their greed was almost impressive. I suppose if you truly believe it's a good idea, trust me, Dad. Mom would want us to be proactive about growing her legacy, not just letting it sit in some low-yield, boring old accounts. I nodded with feigned uncertainty, playing the role of a man grateful for expert guidance but nervous about significant decisions. Well, I certainly don't understand these things well enough to object. I'll just have to rely on your judgment. That's exactly right, Daniel said, his confidence swelling with each word. You focus on healing. Let us handle the business. Speaking of which, Brittany said, pulling out her phone, I've been browsing some investment properties. There's a new luxury condo project in Miami that's in pre-construction. If we act now, we could secure the most desirable units. How much would that cost? Only about $1.5 million for a penthouse unit, Daniel said nonchalantly. It's a bargain, really, given the location and the potential appreciation. $1.5 million. They were already spending my money, money they didn't possess, and never would, as if it were loose change. 1.5 million, I repeated weakly. That's a lot of money. Dad, when you're operating at Mom's level of wealth, 1.5 million is a sound investment, Daniel said, adopting the patronizing tone he'd been using more and more. You need to think about the bigger picture. Small thinking yields small returns. I suppose you're right. I'm just not accustomed to thinking in such large figures. You'll get used to it, Brittany said with a smile that never reached her eyes. It takes time to become comfortable with true wealth. But don't worry, we'll be here to guide you. We spent the next hour with Daniel and Brittany outlining their various investment schemes, each one more extravagant and ambitious than the last. A yacht charter company requiring a $3 million initial outlay, a restaurant franchise needing $5 million in startup funds, a tech startup that was revolutionizing social media and would cost $8 million to get in on the ground floor. By the time they were done, they had theoretically spent nearly $20 million of what they believed was their inheritance. This is all so exciting, I said as they got ready to leave. I never knew there were so many possibilities out there. That's because Mom was conservative in her approach, Daniel said. She did well for her time, but our generation has a different mindset about wealth and risk. I'm just so grateful you're willing to handle all this. I don't know what I would have done without you. You'll never have to find out, Brittany said, leaning down to give me a hug. We're going to take such good care of you. And the estate. Eleanor would be so proud. After they departed, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in Eleanor's study, laughing until tears streamed down my face. In just 3 hours, Daniel and Brittany had laid their motives bare. They perceived me as a helpless, incompetent widower who needed their expert guidance to prevent financial ruin. All the while, they were plotting to gamble away a huge portion of the inheritance on speculative ventures and luxury acquisitions. The perfect irony was that while they believed they were protecting the estate from my poor judgment, they were in fact exposing their own complete lack of wisdom, prudence, and restraint. Every grandiose scheme they had shared was further proof of their unfitness to manage significant wealth. My phone rang as I was finishing my wine. It was Lawrence Hayes. Lawrence, perfect timing. I've just had the most enlightening afternoon. Oh? And how did our aspiring heirs conduct themselves with their first taste of perceived power? They managed to spend $20 million on theoretical investments and treated me like a senile child who needed their protection from the complexities of the world. Lawrence chuckled. Eleanor predicted they would overreach. Did they mention any specific plans? Luxury real estate in Miami, restaurant chains, tech startups, yacht businesses. Daniel seems to believe he's going to double the estate's value through aggressive, high-risk plays. With what money precisely? They're so sure of their inheritance, they're already spending it in their heads. Daniel even mentioned having insider connections for these deals. That's interesting. It suggests he's been planning this for longer than we suspected. There's something else, Lawrence. The casual way they talked about shielding me from people who might take advantage of my grief, while they were literally planning to do just that. The hypocrisy is stunning. That is the most valuable piece of evidence, Arthur. They have shown you exactly who they are when they believe they hold all the cards. How did it feel, playing the helpless widower? I gave the question serious thought. Liberating, actually. There's a certain freedom in letting people underestimate you so thoroughly. Every patronizing remark, every assumption about my intelligence, every casual dismissal of my abilities, it all just makes the coming revelation that much sweeter. And what is coming? A lesson in humility that Daniel and Brittany will never forget. They believe they are about to be crowned king and queen of a 55 million kingdom. Instead, They are about to learn that their kingdom was built on sand. Any regrets? I thought of my son, the little boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard and tell me I was the strongest man in the world. But that child was gone, replaced by a man who saw his father as an obstacle to wealth rather than the man who had loved him unconditionally for 38 years. No regrets, I said, my voice firm. Daniel and Brittany have shown me their true colors. They have chosen greed over family, entitlement over respect, manipulation over love. This is what they have earned. Then you're ready for the will reading. When is it scheduled? Next Friday at 10 a.m. I will inform Daniel and Brittany tomorrow. 1 week from today. Perfect. After I hung up with Lawrence, I walked through my home with a new perspective. Every room, every piece of furniture, every work of art was now, legally, mine. The Persian rugs Daniel and Brittany had walked across while planning to spend my money. The crystal chandelier they had stood beneath while discussing my supposed incompetence. The mahogany dining table where they had eaten countless meals paid for by the very wealth they were now trying to claim. All of it belonged to me. The business, the properties, the investments, the bank accounts, everything Eleanor and I had built together was now under my sole control. But more importantly, I possessed something Daniel and Brittany didn't even know they had given me. Complete clarity about who they truly were. They had ripped off their masks so completely that I could never again doubt that my wife's harsh lesson was exactly what they deserved. The trap was set. Now, all I had to do was wait for them to walk right into it. The next morning, I awoke with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt since Eleanor's death. Today was the start of what I privately called the observation phase. 6 days of watching Daniel and Brittany craft increasingly presumptuous schemes while I played the part of the gracious widower, simply following his son's wise counsel. But first, I needed to lay some social groundwork. I called Helen Sinclair before 9, knowing she would be enjoying her coffee and perusing the society columns, a daily ritual she had maintained for 2 decades. "Helen, my dear, it's Arthur. I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Never, Arthur. How are you holding up? Some days are harder than others. Actually, I was hoping I could ask for your advice on something." Helen's voice immediately took on a tone of keen interest. In our circle, being asked for advice was both a compliment and a duty. "Of course, dear. What is on your mind?" "It's about Daniel and Brittany. They have been so wonderful, offering to help me manage Eleanor's business affairs, but I'm concerned I might be relying on them too much. I don't want to be a burden." "Oh, Arthur, you could never be a burden, but it is very thoughtful of you to be so considerate. What sort of help are they providing?" "Financial advice, mostly. Investment strategies. They have such innovative ideas about growing the family fortune, but I must admit, I don't grasp half of what they're proposing." Helen's response had just the right hint of caution. "Innovation can be a wonderful thing, Arthur, but it can also be quite risky. Eleanor was always so prudent with her investments." "That's precisely my thinking. But Daniel is so confident, and Brittany has very strong opinions about modern financial strategies. I don't want to appear old-fashioned or resistant to new ideas." "My dear, there is nothing old-fashioned about prudence. Some of us remember what happened to the Peterson fortune when young James decided to modernize his father's conservative portfolio. I remember it all too well. James Peterson had lost 60% of his inheritance in 3 years through speculative tech investments and ill-advised real estate ventures. His family never regained their social standing. That's exactly what I fear. But I don't want to offend Daniel by questioning his judgment. Perhaps you should seek a second opinion. Lawrence Hayes has always been so dependable." "Oh, I will certainly be consulting with Lawrence. I was just wondering, Do you think it would be appropriate for me to bring some of this up at the charity luncheon tomorrow? Not to gossip, of course, but just to seek some general advice about estate management. Helen understood instantly. The charity luncheon was a gathering of the city's most influential figures, many of whom had experienced managing substantial wealth after the loss of their spouses. If I voiced concerns about overly aggressive investment tactics in that environment, the news would circulate quickly through our social web. I think that would be perfectly appropriate. Eleanor Richardson went through something very similar after her husband passed. And Patricia Ashford has a great deal of experience with estate matters. They would both have valuable perspectives. Thank you, Helen. You always know just what to say. That's what friends are for, my dear. And Arthur, don't let anyone push you into decisions you are not comfortable with. Your instincts have always been sound. After we spoke, I called 2 other influential men in our circle and had similar conversations. By the end of the morning, I had sown seeds of concern about aggressive investment strategies and the pressure that eager young heirs sometimes place on their grieving parents. I had framed myself as the thoughtful widower seeking wise counsel, and Daniel and Brittany as the overzealous children promoting risky financial ventures. The beauty of it was that I hadn't said anything untrue or overtly critical. I had simply voiced the natural anxieties of a man worried about making the right choices for his late wife's legacy. Around noon, Daniel called, his voice brimming with excitement. "Dad, fantastic news. I spoke with the developer in Miami this morning. They're reserving the penthouse for us, but we need to act fast. The deposit is only $200, and they're offering special financing terms for the rest." My grip on the phone tightened. $200? That sounds like a hefty deposit. It's actually very fair for a property of this stature. And Dad, the projected returns are phenomenal. We're talking about a property that could be worth $3 million in 5 years. $200,000. Money that Daniel didn't actually have access to yet, but he spoke as if the deal were already done. "Are you sure this is a good idea, son?" "Absolutely. In fact, I'm so confident that I think we should aim even higher. That restaurant franchise I mentioned? I heard back from their corporate office. They want to fast-track our application because they're impressed with our financial standing." "What does that mean exactly?" "It means they're offering us 3 locations instead of just 1. The investment would be larger, $15 million in total, but the potential revenue is astronomical. $15 million. Daniel was casually discussing an investment that amounted to more than a quarter of the entire estate. $15 million sounds like an enormous amount of money, Daniel. Dad, you have to stop thinking in small terms. With Mom's level of wealth, $15 million is a substantial but manageable investment, and the franchise potential is off the charts. We're talking about building a regional empire. Our empire. Not his investment, but ours. Daniel was already seeing himself as the new head of the family, making decisions that would impact the entire estate. I suppose if you're certain. I am. In fact, Brittany and I are meeting with their corporate team tomorrow to sign the initial agreements. They want to move quickly because there are other investors lined up. Tomorrow? That seems very sudden. That's how these things work, Dad. You have to be decisive. Mom understood that. It's how she built her fortune. Quick decisions, calculated risks, aggressive growth. The irony was staggering. Eleanor had built her fortune through meticulous planning, conservative investments, and steady expansion over decades. Daniel was describing the exact opposite approach and attributing it to his mother. Well, I trust your judgment, son. You've clearly given this a lot of thought. Exactly. And Dad, there's one more thing. Brittany and I have been talking, and we think it might be time for you to start thinking about simplifying your living situation. Simplifying? The house is so large for just one person, and the upkeep must be astronomical. We were thinking you might be happier in a nice condo. Maybe one of those new luxury buildings downtown, much more manageable for someone in your position. Someone in my position, a widower, who needed his son's guidance because he was clearly incapable of managing a large home or significant wealth on his own. I hadn't really considered moving. You don't have to decide right away, but the real estate market is incredibly strong right now. The house would likely sell quickly for a premium price. The proceeds could help fund some of our larger investment ventures. The proceeds from selling my house, the home Eleanor and I had built together, filled with a lifetime of memories, would fund Daniel's high-risk business schemes. He was already mentally liquidating my entire existence to finance his get-rich-quick fantasies. I'll think about it. Take your time. But Brittany found a great realtor who specializes in luxury properties. She could stop by next week just to give us an idea of the house's market value. No pressure, just for information. After Daniel hung up, I sat in my kitchen, staring at the phone in disbelief. In a single conversation, my son had discussed spending $200 on a real estate deposit, committed to a $15 million restaurant franchise, and suggested I sell my home to underwrite his entrepreneurial ambitions, all while treating me like a child who needed protection from complex financial matters. I called Lawrence immediately. "Lawrence, Daniel just talked about spending $200 on a Miami condo deposit and committing to a $15 million restaurant deal, all in the last 24 hours. Interesting. He's moving more quickly than Eleanor predicted. Has he actually spent any money yet? He's making plans as if he already has control of the funds. He has meetings scheduled for tomorrow to sign preliminary contracts. Arthur, I need you to be clear on this. Daniel cannot actually access any estate funds until the will is probated and the inheritance is legally transferred. Every dollar he's planning to spend exists only in his imagination. Then how is he planning to cover these deposits and commitments? Either he's intending to use his own personal funds, which are quite limited, or he is making promises based on an inheritance he expects to receive, but does not legally possess. What happens if he signs agreements he can't fulfill? That depends on the specific contracts. But generally, if someone commits to investments they cannot fund, they could face lawsuits for breach of contract, severe damage to their credit, and possibly even fraud charges if they have misrepresented their financial standing. The scale of Daniel's potential blunder was immense. He was so convinced of his inheritance that he was making commitments that could financially ruin him if he was wrong. Lawrence, is there any way he could access estate funds before the will is read? None whatsoever. Eleanor was extremely precise about the timing. Until the will is officially read and probated, Daniel has no legal claim to any of the estate's assets. Every plan he is making is based on assumption, not legal fact. That afternoon, I attended the charity luncheon, where many of the city's most prominent figures had gathered to discuss both philanthropy and, more importantly, the social currents of our community. I arrived looking appropriately somber in a simple navy suit, the image of a man still deep in mourning but endeavoring to uphold his social duties. "Arthur, my dear, how are you managing?" asked Eleanor Richardson, whose husband had passed away 7 years prior, leaving her to handle a similarly complex estate. "Some days are better than others," I replied. "Honestly, I'm trying to get a handle on Eleanor's business matters, but it is all so overwhelming." Oh, I remember that feeling well. The pressure to make critical decisions while you are still grieving is immense. Are you getting good advice? Daniel and Brittany have been wonderful, offering to help with investment decisions. They have such modern ideas about wealth management, but I confess, I'm more comfortable with Eleanor's conservative approach. Conservative is not a dirty word, my dear, said Patricia Ashford, whose family had maintained their fortune for 4 generations through careful stewardship. There is much to be said for preserving wealth rather than constantly trying to multiply it. That's what I keep thinking. But Daniel is so confident about these new ventures, Miami real estate, restaurant chains, technology companies. He says I need to think bigger. The men and women at the table exchanged knowing glances. In our circle, everyone had heard tales of heirs who had squandered their inheritances through overconfidence and poor judgment. Arthur, Eleanor said carefully, you know you don't have to rush into any major decisions. Estate matters can wait until you are emotionally prepared to deal with them. That's what I told Daniel. But he seems to think time is of the essence. He says these opportunities won't wait. Opportunities never seem to wait, Patricia observed wryly. That is usually the first sign that they are not as good as they seem. By the end of the afternoon, I had achieved exactly what I had intended. Word would ripple through our social network that Daniel was pressuring his grieving father to make risky financial decisions quickly, without giving him adequate time to process his loss or seek proper counsel. When the truth about the inheritance emerged, public opinion would already be inclined against him. That evening, I walked through my home, contemplating the week ahead. 6 more days of watching Daniel and Brittany dig themselves deeper into a pit of their own making. 6 more days of being underestimated and condescended to by people who had no idea they were playing a game they had already lost. The will reading was set for Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, Daniel and Brittany would discover that all their grand plans were built on a foundation of false assumptions. I was ready for that moment. More than ready, I was eager for it. 4 days before the will reading, Lawrence called me at 7 in the morning. Arthur, we need to meet. Daniel's activities over the past week have created an extensive paper trail. How extensive? Extensive enough that I need to show you the documentation in person. Can you come to my office this morning? An hour later, I sat in Lawrence's office, looking at a stack of documents that detailed my son's spectacular descent into financial delusion. Lawrence had arranged the papers like exhibits in a legal case, each one more damning than the last. Let's begin with what we know for certain, Lawrence said, settling behind his desk with the somber expression of a doctor delivering a grave diagnosis. The Miami condo. Daniel has signed a letter of intent and provided personal financial statements claiming liquid assets of $55 million. He doesn't have $55 million. Correct. He has essentially committed fraud by misrepresenting his financial position to secure the deal. Lawrence produced another document, the restaurant franchise. He signed preliminary agreements for 3 locations, with a total investment commitment of $15 million. $15 million that he doesn't have, correct? Again, correct. But it gets worse. The franchise company has granted preliminary approval based on his financial representations. If he cannot produce the funds by next Friday, the day after the will reading, he will be in breach of contract. Lawrence laid out more papers. Yesterday, he also put earnest money down on a warehouse property for $2.8 million, which he intends to convert into luxury lofts. And he has committed to investing in a tech startup with a minimum investment of $5 million. The numbers were dizzying. How much in total? Over the past week, Daniel has committed to spending approximately $23 million. That's nearly half the value of the estate. How is he funding any of this? He isn't. He is making commitments based entirely on his anticipated inheritance. Every contract he has signed includes warranties about his liquid assets and investment capacity that are entirely false. Lawrence opened his laptop and displayed a spreadsheet. Eleanor had monitoring set up on all of Daniel's financial accounts. His actual liquid assets amount to approximately 80 between his savings account and some company stock options. 80,000 versus the 55 million he's claiming. Precisely. Arthur, your son isn't just making poor investment choices. He is committing fraud by misrepresenting his financial situation to secure these opportunities. The legal ramifications were beginning to sink in. Daniel wasn't just going to be disappointed by his inheritance. He was going to face potential criminal charges for securing contracts under false pretenses. There's more, Lawrence continued. Brittany has been equally busy. She has ordered a custom Mercedes for 150. She has hired an interior designer to renovate their apartment at a cost of 200. And she has made deposits on jewelry and clothing totaling 85. All based on money they don't have. All based on money they will never have. But Arthur, the most concerning development occurred yesterday evening. Lawrence turned his laptop screen toward me, revealing what appeared to be a real estate listing. Daniel contacted a realtor about listing your house. He told her he was managing your affairs and wanted to discuss a quick sale to capitalize on the current market. My blood ran cold. He did what? Fortunately, the realtor knows our family and called me immediately. She was worried about Daniel making decisions regarding your property without your direct involvement or proper legal authority. He hasn't signed anything yet, but he scheduled a meeting with her for this afternoon to discuss marketing strategies. He told her you were eager to downsize and wanted to move quickly while the market was favorable. The audacity was breathtaking. Daniel was not only spending money he didn't have, but was also attempting to sell property that wasn't his to liquidate. Lawrence, what happens when the will is read and Daniel realizes he's not inheriting anything? Legally, he will be personally liable for every commitment he has made and every misrepresentation he has provided. The other parties to these contracts will demand immediate payment or performance. When he can't deliver, they will pursue legal action. If he cannot pay, bankruptcy would be the best-case scenario. The worst-case scenario would be criminal fraud charges for obtaining contracts through false representations. His reputation and professional standing would be utterly destroyed. Lawrence leaned back, his expression a mixture of sympathy and satisfaction. Eleanor designed this lesson to be thorough. Daniel won't just lose his expected inheritance, he'll lose everything he actually owns, and he will face legal consequences for his deception. I thought of my son, the little boy who had once been so honest, he would confess to breaking things even when no one suspected him. Somewhere along the line, that honest child had become a man who would lie about having 55 million to secure business deals. Is there any way to stop this, to warn him before it's too late? Lawrence studied my face. Do you want to warn him? It was a fair question. Did I want to save Daniel from the consequences of his own dishonesty and greed? Did a father's love compel me to rescue him from a catastrophe of his own making? I thought of his words at the funeral. It's our time now. I thought of Brittany's declaration that they were in charge. I thought of their casual dismissal of my intelligence, their assumption that I needed their guidance to avoid making poor financial choices. No, I said finally. Daniel has made his choices based on his own assumptions and entitlement. He is an adult who should understand the risks of misrepresenting his financial situation. And Brittany? Brittany married Daniel for his expected wealth, not for love. She has encouraged every reckless decision he has made because she thought it would benefit her. They deserve each other. Lawrence nodded in approval. Then we proceed as planned. The will reading is scheduled for 10 a.m. on Friday. I will confirm the time and location with Daniel and Brittany today. Will anyone else be there? Just us, Daniel, Brittany, and my associate, who will act as a witness. Eleanor wanted this to be a private affair. No audience for the revelation except those directly involved. As I prepared to leave, Lawrence handed me one last document. Eleanor's final instructions for you. She wanted you to read this the night before the will reading. The envelope was sealed with wax and marked, "For Arthur, Thursday night only." I slipped it into my pocket, knowing that whatever it held would either fortify my resolve or shake it to its core. That afternoon, Daniel called with his now familiar excitement. "Dad, incredible news! The restaurant franchise's corporate office loved our financial profile. We've been approved for all 3 locations, and they want to move on the funding immediately." "That's wonderful, son," I said, the words feeling hollow now that I knew the truth about his financial situation. "And the tech startup? They are so impressed with our investment capacity that they are offering us a board position. Can you imagine? We'll be part of the decision-making process for what could be the next major breakthrough in social media." The fantasy was complete. Daniel had convinced himself that he wasn't just inheriting money. He was inheriting a position of influence and respect in the business world. He saw himself as a serious investor, a decision-maker, a man whose opinions would carry weight in boardrooms and strategy sessions. "You seem to have everything so well planned." "That's the key, Dad. Mom always said success comes from planning ahead, and that's exactly what we're doing. By the time the estate is officially settled, we'll already have our investment portfolio optimized and our business ventures launched. And if something goes wrong, nothing is going to go wrong, Dad. I have insider knowledge on all of these deals. These aren't random investments. They are carefully researched opportunities with proven track records." Insider knowledge, proven track records. Daniel wasn't just making poor financial decisions. He was basing them on a complete misunderstanding of how legitimate business operates. "Well, I certainly don't understand these things well enough to question your judgment." "Exactly. That's why you're lucky to have us handling this. Brittany and I have been studying investment strategies for months, preparing for this moment. You can just focus on healing and let us manage the wealth building." After Daniel hung up, I called Helen Sinclair for a final round of social preparation. "Helen, I need your advice on something delicate." "Of course, dear. What is troubling you?" "I'm worried that Daniel might be moving too aggressively with some investment decisions. He's discussing amounts that seem very large for someone who hasn't actually inherited anything yet." "What kinds of amounts?" "Millions, Helen. Multiple millions. Across various projects he is convinced will generate enormous returns." Helen was quiet for a moment. "Arthur, has Daniel actually inherited anything yet?" "I thought Eleanor's will hadn't been read." "It hasn't. That's happening on Friday. But Daniel seems to be making financial commitments based on his expectations about the inheritance." "Oh my." Helen's voice carried the tone of someone who had seen this story before and knew how it ended. "That is very concerning. I've tried to suggest that he might want to wait until things are official, but he says opportunities won't wait. He seems so certain about everything. Certainty can be dangerous when it's based on assumptions rather than facts." By the end of our conversation, Helen understood the situation perfectly. Daniel was making large financial commitments based on an inheritance he hadn't actually received. When word of this spread through our social circle, which it would, by tomorrow Daniel's reputation would be damaged before the will reading even took place. That evening, I sat in Eleanor's study with a glass of wine, thinking about the day to come. Tomorrow would bring the moment of truth, the revelation that would shatter Daniel and Brittany's dreams and expose their greed and dishonesty to the world. I was ready. After a week of watching them treat me like an incompetent child, while they planned to spend money they didn't have on dreams they would never achieve, I was more than ready. The paper trail had proven that Daniel and Brittany weren't just greedy. They were dishonest. They had lied about their financial situation to secure business opportunities, committed to investments they couldn't fund, and planned to liquidate my home to cover their schemes. Tomorrow, they would discover that every plan they had made, every commitment they had signed, every lie they had told was about to collapse around them, and I would be there to watch it happen. Friday morning dawned gray and overcast, with autumn clouds threatening rain. I dressed meticulously in a dark Armani suit, elegant but sober, fitting for the widower of a successful woman. My accessories were minimal. Eleanor's wedding ring on a chain around my neck, simple cufflinks, and my own wedding band. I wanted to appear dignified yet vulnerable, like a man still processing his grief and relying on others for guidance through complex legal proceedings. Lawrence's office building looked imposing under the dreary sky, its glass and steel facade mirroring the gray clouds. I arrived 15 minutes early and sat in my car, watching as Daniel and Brittany pulled up in what looked like a brand new BMW. Apparently, they had decided to upgrade their transportation in anticipation of their windfall. Daniel looked ecstatic, practically vibrating with energy as he walked toward the building. He wore his finest suit and a tie I had given him for his birthday 2 years ago, and he carried himself with the assurance of a man about to claim his kingdom. Brittany was equally animated, her designer dress and flawless hairstyle suggesting she was preparing for a celebration rather than a legal meeting. They had no idea what awaited them. I entered the building a few minutes after them, riding the elevator to Lawrence's floor while mentally rehearsing my role one last time. I needed to seem appropriately subdued, perhaps a little bewildered by legal jargon, and grateful for my son's presence and support. The receptionist guided me to Lawrence's main conference room, where Daniel and Brittany were already seated at the polished mahogany table. Daniel jumped to his feet to embrace me as I walked in. "Dad, how are you feeling? I know this must be difficult." "I'm managing, son. Thank you for being here. I don't know what I'd do without your support." Brittany offered a sympathetic smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We're here for you, Arthur. Whatever the will says, we'll figure it all out together." Lawrence entered with his associate, both men carrying leather portfolios containing the documents that would alter all our lives. Lawrence looked solemn and professional, offering no hint of the bombshell he was about to drop. "Thank you all for coming," Lawrence began, taking his seat at the head of the table. "Before we start, I want to outline the process. I will read the will in its entirety, and then I will answer any questions you may have about its provisions. The document has been properly witnessed and notarized, and all legal requirements have been met." Daniel nodded eagerly. "We understand. Please, go ahead." Lawrence opened his portfolio and removed a thick document bound in blue legal backing. "This is the last will and testament of Eleanor Jane Sinclair, executed on September 20th of this year." September 20th. Just 6 weeks before Eleanor's death. The timing was not lost on me. She had finalized these arrangements after her diagnosis, after observing Daniel's behavior during her illness, after making her final judgment of our son's character. I will begin with the preliminary declarations, and then proceed to the specific bequests. Lawrence continued, "Eleanor's words, as written. I, Eleanor Jane Sinclair, being of sound mind and body, do hereby make this my final will and testament, revoking all previous wills and codicils." Daniel leaned forward slightly, his entire attention fixed on Lawrence's words. "First, I wish to express my profound love for my husband Arthur, who has been my partner, my confidant, and my greatest strength for 32 years. Everything I accomplished with his support, his wisdom, and his unwavering dedication to our family and our shared goals. I felt my eyes well up at Eleanor's words, and I saw Daniel smile faintly at what he likely saw as a touching but irrelevant preamble before the real business began. Second, I wish to acknowledge my son, Daniel, who has taught me a great deal about the difference between earning something and expecting it, between building a legacy and simply inheriting one. Daniel's smile wavered for a moment at the subtle sting in those words, but he quickly regained his confident demeanor. Lawrence continued reading the preliminary statements, then paused before arriving at the heart of the document. Now, for the specific bequests, to my beloved husband, Arthur Sinclair, I leave the entirety of my estate, including but not limited to all real property, all business interests, all investment accounts, all personal property, and all liquid assets. The words hung in the still air like a thunderclap. Daniel's face went blank with utter confusion, and Brittany's mouth fell slightly open in shock. This includes full ownership of Sinclair Consolidated, all subsidiary companies, the family residence, all vacation properties, all vehicles, all art and collectibles, and all bank accounts, investment portfolios, and retirement funds. Wait, Daniel interjected, his voice tight with disbelief. What about, what's left for? Lawrence looked up from the document, his expression unreadable. I have not finished reading, Daniel. Please allow me to continue. To my son, Daniel Sinclair, I leave the sum of $1 to be paid from petty cash. The silence that followed was absolute. Daniel stared at Lawrence, as if he had just spoken in an unknown language, while Brittany's face cycled through confusion, shock, and dawning horror. $1? Daniel's voice cracked. That's not possible. Mom promised me. We discussed. There is more, Lawrence said quietly, and resumed reading. I make this bequest to Daniel not out of cruelty, but out of love. For the past 2 years, I have watched my son demonstrate that he values inheritance over achievement, entitlement over effort, and wealth over wisdom. I have seen him treat his father, my beloved partner, with disrespect and condescension, assuming that his grief would make him vulnerable to manipulation. Daniel shot to his feet. This is insane. She couldn't have written this. Someone influenced her. Someone changed her mind. Daniel, Lawrence said sharply, sit down and let me finish reading your mother's words. Daniel sank back into his chair, his face pale and his hands trembling. I leave Daniel $1 as a reminder that love must be earned, respect must be demonstrated, and family loyalty is a two-way street. If my son wishes to build wealth, he can do so as I did, through hard work, smart decisions, and personal sacrifice. If he wishes to earn a place in our family legacy, he can prove himself worthy through his actions, not his birthright. Brittany's carefully constructed composure finally shattered. This is impossible. Arthur, you have to contest this. Eleanor wasn't thinking clearly. Actually, Lawrence interjected. Eleanor underwent a complete psychological evaluation 1 week before signing this will. The results showed her to be of completely sound mind, fully aware of her decisions, and acting without any undue influence. He pulled out another document. Furthermore, Eleanor specifically anticipated that this will might be contested. She prepared a detailed explanation of her reasoning, supported by documentation of Daniel's behavior over the past 18 months. Daniel found his voice again, though it was little more than a croak. What kind of documentation? Lawrence's expression remained professionally neutral. Recordings of conversations where you discussed your inheritance expectations, copies of financial commitments you have made based on anticipated wealth, and testimony from multiple witnesses about your treatment of your father during Eleanor's illness and after her death. The blood drained from Daniel's face as he grasped the full implications. Not only had he failed to inherit anything, but his mother had been methodically documenting his greed and entitlement for months. "This can't be legal," Brittany said desperately. "There have to be laws against disinheriting your own children. In this state, individuals have complete discretion over the distribution of their estates," Lawrence replied calmly. "Eleanor's will is entirely legal and virtually uncontestable." I watched my son process the reality of his situation. In the span of 5 minutes, he had gone from expecting to inherit $55 million to inheriting $1. But more than that, he was realizing that his mother had seen through his facade completely, had recognized his greed and entitlement, and had chosen to teach him a lesson that would define the rest of his life. "Dad," Daniel turned to me, his voice desperate. "You can change this. You inherited everything. You can give me what Mom should have left me. You can fix this." The moment I had both dreaded and anticipated had arrived. Daniel was looking at me with the expectation that I would rescue him from the consequences of his own actions, that a father's love would trump judgment and justice. I looked at my son. This man who had dismissed my intelligence, planned to sell my home without my knowledge, committed fraud by misrepresenting his financial standing, and treated me like an incompetent child who needed his guidance. I thought of Eleanor's letter, of the choice between mercy and justice. "Daniel," I said quietly, "your mother's will reflects her assessment of your character and your recent behavior. I don't believe I should override her judgment." "What?" Daniel's voice was raw with disbelief. "Dad, I'm your son. I'm your only child. You can't seriously be considering leaving me with nothing." "You are not being left with nothing. You are being left with the opportunity to prove yourself worthy of respect through your own efforts, rather than your birthright." Brittany leaned across the table, her mask of concern finally dropping to reveal the cold calculation beneath. "Arthur, you need to think about this carefully. Daniel is your family. Blood is thicker than water." "Brittany," I said with a calm I didn't entirely feel, "over the past week, you have made it very clear that you and Daniel consider yourselves to be in charge of this family's wealth. You have planned how to spend this inheritance, how to grow it, how to use it to fund your dreams. You have treated me like an obstacle to your wealth, rather than the man who helped build it." "That's not true." "It is completely true. You have dismissed my intelligence, questioned my judgment, and assumed that my grief would make me susceptible to your manipulation. You even had Daniel contact realtors about selling my home to finance his investment schemes." Daniel's face contorted as he realized how completely his behavior had been observed and documented. "Dad, if we said things that hurt you, we're sorry. We were just trying to help." "You were trying to help yourselves," I said firmly. "And now you can continue to help yourselves, but with your own resources instead of mine." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Brittany beginning to cry, not the delicate tears of grief, but the harsh sobs of someone watching their dreams turn to dust. "Lawrence," Daniel said desperately, "there has to be something we can do, some way to challenge this. Daniel, you can certainly hire an attorney and attempt to contest the will. But I must warn you, doing so will trigger the release of all the documentation your mother compiled about your behavior. The recordings, the financial records, the witness testimony, all of it will become part of the public record." The threat was clear. Daniel could fight the will, but doing so would expose his greed, entitlement, and recent dishonesty to public scrutiny. In our social circle, where reputation was paramount, such a revelation would be devastating. "How long do I have to decide?" Daniel asked. 30 days from today to file any contest." "But Daniel, there is something else you should know. Your mother was aware that you might make financial commitments in anticipation of your inheritance. All of your recent agreements, the Miami condo, the restaurant franchise, the warehouse property, the tech startup, all of those obligations remain your personal responsibility. Daniel's face went ashen as the full scope of his predicament became clear. Not only had he failed to inherit the money he had been counting on, but he was personally liable for over $20 million in commitments he had made based on wealth he would never receive. "I don't understand," Brittany whispered. "How are we supposed to pay for everything? The restaurant investments, the real estate commitments, the loans we've taken out?" "That," Lawrence said with ruthless precision, "is no longer the estate's concern. Those were personal decisions made by adults who chose to make financial commitments based on assumptions rather than legal guarantees." As the full implications of their situation sank in, I watched the dynamic between Daniel and Brittany shift in real time. The confidence and partnership they had displayed while planning to spend my inheritance vanished, replaced by panic and the beginnings of blame. "Daniel," Brittany said, her voice sharp with accusation, "you told me the inheritance was guaranteed. You said your mother had promised you everything." "She did. She discussed succession planning with me. She talked about me taking over the business. Apparently she changed her mind," I said quietly. "And now you will need to figure out how to handle your obligations without the safety net you were expecting." Daniel turned to me one last time, his expression a mixture of desperation and dawning anger. "Dad, please, I'm begging you. Don't let Mom's decision destroy our entire family." "Daniel, your mother wasn't trying to destroy our family. She was trying to save it, and so am I." I stood up, gathering my things with as much dignity as I could muster. "Lawrence, thank you for handling this so professionally. I assume there are additional papers I will need to sign. We can schedule a follow-up meeting next week to handle the estate transfer details." As I moved toward the door, Daniel called after me. "Dad, wait. We need to talk about this. We need to figure out how to move forward." I paused at the doorway and looked back at my son, this man who had valued money over family, inheritance over love, entitlement over respect. "Daniel, your mother gave you exactly what you earned. I suggest you think very carefully about what you want to earn from me going forward." And with that, I walked out of the conference room, leaving Daniel and Brittany to confront the ruins of their empire of greed. I made it to my car before the trembling began. Sitting in the parking garage beneath Lawrence's building, I gripped the steering wheel and tried to process what had just occurred. In the span of 30 minutes, I had witnessed my son's entire world crumble. The confident, entitled man who had walked into that conference room expecting to claim a $55 million inheritance had left with $1 and the crushing weight of over $20 million in commitments he could never honor. Part of me, the father who had loved Daniel unconditionally for 38 years, wanted to run back upstairs and fix everything, to tell Lawrence I had changed my mind, that I would honor Daniel's expectations and provide the inheritance he had been counting on. But the larger part of me, the part that Eleanor had recognized and trusted, knew that this lesson was not just deserved, but necessary. Daniel and Brittany had revealed their true characters so completely over the past week that there could be no doubt about their motivations or their respect for me as a person. My phone rang before I could start the car. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately. Then again. By the fourth call, I turned off the phone entirely and drove home in silence, needing the sanctuary of my house. My house now, legally and completely, to process the magnitude of what had just happened. I was pouring myself a glass of wine when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see Daniel's new BMW in my driveway, and both Daniel and Brittany standing on my front porch. Daniel was pacing, his hands running through his hair in a gesture I remembered from his childhood when he was deeply upset. Brittany stood rigidly beside him, her earlier tears replaced by something that looked like cold fury. I opened the door, but did not invite them in. "Dad, we need to talk," Daniel said immediately. "This whole situation is insane. We have to figure out how to fix it." "There is nothing to fix, Daniel. Your mother's will is exactly what she wanted it to be, but it's wrong. Dad was sick. She wasn't thinking clearly. You know she intended for me to inherit the business, to carry on her legacy. Did she? Because from what I heard today, your mother was very clear about her intentions." Brittany stepped forward, her composure cracking. "Arthur, you have to understand. We've made commitments based on the inheritance, financial commitments that we cannot meet without access to the estate." "What kind of commitments?" Daniel and Brittany exchanged a glance, and I could see them calculating how much to reveal. "The restaurant franchise," Daniel said finally. "We owe $15 million, with deadlines starting next week." "The Miami real estate," Brittany added. "We've signed agreements that require us to produce $2 million in funding." "The warehouse property, the tech startup," Daniel's voice trailed off, as the full scope of his obligations became clear even to him. "How much in total?" I asked, though Lawrence had already given me the numbers. "About $23 million, Daniel whispered. "Maybe more." The sum hung in the air between us, like a death sentence. $23 million in commitments made by a man who earned a modest salary and had maybe 0 in actual assets. "I see, and you were planning to pay for all of this with money you hadn't actually inherited yet." "Dad, everyone makes investments based on expected income. Mom did it all the time when she was building the business. Your mother made investments based on revenue from existing businesses and proven income streams. You made commitments based on money you assumed you would inherit without having to earn it." Brittany's facade finally shattered completely. "This is ridiculous. You're going to let your own son be destroyed financially because of some vindictive game your dead wife decided to play?" The words hit me like a physical blow. "Excuse me? You heard me. Eleanor is dead, Arthur. Whatever petty grudges she held against Daniel died with her. You're alive. You have the power to fix this, and you're choosing to let Daniel suffer because of some twisted loyalty to a corpse." Daniel paled at his wife's words. "Brittany, don't." "No, Daniel. Someone needs to say it. Your father is hiding behind your mother's will instead of taking responsibility for his own decisions. He could transfer the inheritance to you tomorrow if he wanted to. He's choosing not to." I looked at this woman who had married my son, who had lived in luxury funded by our family's generosity, who had treated me with condescension and disrespect for 5 years. Now, faced with the collapse of her entitled lifestyle, she was showing her true nature completely. "You're absolutely right, Brittany. I am choosing not to transfer the inheritance to Daniel. Would you like to know why? Because you're a bitter old man who can't stand to see anyone else be happy." The insult was so crude, so utterly lacking in any pretense of respect or affection, that it actually clarified my thinking. This was who Brittany really was when her mask came off. This was the woman who had influenced my son's transformation from a loving child into an entitled stranger. "No," I said calmly. "Because you just called my wife Daniel's mother a corpse and suggested that her final wishes were a vindictive game. Because you have shown me exactly what you think of family loyalty and respect for the dead. And because you have demonstrated that you see me as nothing more than an obstacle to wealth, rather than a human being deserving of basic courtesy." Daniel finally found his voice. "Dad, Brittany is upset. She didn't mean..." "She meant every word, Daniel. And the fact that you are defending her instead of being appalled by her disrespect tells me everything I need to know about where your loyalties lie." My loyalties are with my family. No, Daniel, your loyalties are with your wallet. If they were with your family, you wouldn't have spent the week after your mother's funeral planning how to spend her money. You wouldn't have lied to investors about having $55 million. You wouldn't have tried to arrange the sale of my home without my knowledge to fund your investment schemes. I stepped back from the door, preparing to close it. Your mother left you exactly what you earned. $1 and a lesson about the difference between entitlement and achievement. What you do with that lesson is entirely up to you. Dad, wait. Daniel's desperation was palpable. What about the restaurant franchise? The deadline is Monday. If I can't produce the $15 million, they'll sue me for breach of contract. I could lose everything I actually own. Then you should probably contact an attorney to help you understand your options. What options? I don't have $15 million. I don't have access to any significant money without the inheritance. Then perhaps you should have considered that before making commitments based on money you didn't actually have. Vanessa's composure snapped entirely. You selfish old fool. You're going to destroy Daniel's life because of your own petty jealousy. Brittany. Daniel grabbed his wife's arm, finally showing some awareness of how completely inappropriate her behavior was. But the damage was done. In her desperation, Brittany had revealed the absolute contempt she felt for me, the crude calculation that had always been beneath her polished surface. Get off my property, I said quietly. Both of you. Now. Dad, please. Daniel, you have a choice to make. You can continue to enable your wife's disrespect toward me and toward your mother's memory, or you can decide that family loyalty actually means something, but you cannot have both my support and her contempt. I closed the door before either of them could respond, turning the deadbolt with shaking hands. Through the window, I watched them argue in my driveway for several minutes before finally driving away. My landline rang as I was finishing my wine. It was Lawrence. Arthur, I wanted to check on you. How are you holding up? It's been a difficult afternoon. Daniel and Brittany came by. I imagine they weren't pleased. That's an understatement. Brittany called Eleanor a corpse and suggested her will was a vindictive game. She also called me a selfish. Lawrence was quiet for a moment. I am sorry you had to endure that. But it does confirm that Eleanor's assessment of their character was accurate. Lawrence, am I doing the right thing? Daniel is facing financial ruin. Those commitments he made, the restaurant franchise, the real estate deals, the penalty clauses alone could bankrupt him. Arthur, let me ask you something. If you gave Daniel the money to cover his commitments right now, what do you think he would learn from the experience? I thought about it seriously. That there are no real consequences for his choices. That no matter how reckless his decisions, someone will always rescue him. And what would Brittany learn? That disrespecting me works. That calling my wife a corpse and me a fool is an effective strategy for getting what she wants. Exactly. Eleanor designed this lesson to be definitive precisely because anything less would be meaningless. Daniel needed to face real consequences for his entitlement and dishonesty, or he would never change. But what if he can't handle the pressure? What if this destroys him completely? Then you will discover what he is really made of, and if he proves himself capable of growth and change, you will still have the power to help him rebuild on terms that require genuine respect and appreciation rather than entitlement. After Lawrence hung up, I walked through my house, thinking about the choice I had made. Every room held memories of Daniel's childhood, of the loving little boy who had wanted nothing more than to make his parents proud. But that child was gone, replaced by a man who valued inheritance over integrity, wealth over wisdom. If that man was going to find his way back to the values Eleanor and I had tried to teach him, it would have to happen through his own efforts, his own choices, his own recognition of what truly mattered in life. The lesson had been delivered. Now, we would all discover whether Daniel was capable of learning it. The following 4 weeks were a masterclass in the demolition of entitlement. I learned about the unraveling of Daniel and Brittany's life through a carefully curated network of social contacts who kept me informed without my ever having to ask directly. Helen Sinclair, Eleanor Richardson, and Patricia Ashford became my unwitting intelligence sources, sharing news of Daniel's financial crisis with the feigned concern of friends who assumed I was being kept abreast by my son. I was not. Daniel had called me exactly once since the will reading. A brief, desperate conversation in which he demanded that I fix this situation before his life was completely ruined. When I gently suggested that he might want to approach me with respect rather than demands, he had hung up. The first public sign of their troubles came when their new BMW was repossessed from the parking lot of Brittany's spa. According to Helen, who heard it from her manicurist, Brittany had caused a considerable scene, screaming at the repo men that there had been a mistake and that she would have them arrested for theft. The poor dear seemed quite distraught, Helen had reported over lunch. Her manicurist said she was crying and insisting this was all a misunderstanding, that her family's lawyer would sort everything out. The second sign was the restaurant franchise deadline. Lawrence had kept me informed of Daniel's increasingly frantic attempts to secure financing. He had approached every bank in the city, offering personal guarantees he couldn't back, and making claims about his inheritance that were no longer valid. When the first deadline passed without payment, the penalty clauses were triggered immediately. Daniel was now liable, not just for the $15 million investment, but for an additional $3 million in fees and damages, $18 million for a man whose annual salary was $100,000. The franchise company has hired a collection agency, Lawrence informed me during one of our weekly updates. They are moving aggressively to recover their losses. Daniel's credit rating has been decimated, and they are preparing to garnish his wages. The Miami real estate deal was the next to collapse. Unable to secure financing for the $2 million commitment, Daniel had to forfeit his deposits and face penalties for breach of contract, adding another $600,000 to his mountain of debt. But the most devastating blow came when Sinclair consolidated my company, now terminated Daniel's employment. I hadn't ordered his dismissal. In fact, I had specifically instructed the management team that personnel decisions should be based on performance and conduct, not family ties. But Daniel's financial crisis had started to impact his work. He had been taking calls from creditors during business hours, using company resources to try to arrange personal financing, and had apparently made several inappropriate comments to colleagues about his father's vindictive refusal to honor his inheritance. When the human resources director called to inform me of Daniel's termination, she was clearly uncomfortable. "Mr. Sinclair, I want you to know this decision was not made lightly, but Daniel's behavior over the past 3 weeks has been disruptive and unprofessional. He has been using company time to handle personal financial matters. And last week, he told a client that Sinclair Consolidated was experiencing family ownership disputes that might affect our ability to deliver on contracts." "I see. We cannot have employees spreading doubt about the company's stability, especially not employees in senior positions. I hope you understand." I did understand. Daniel had been so consumed by his financial crisis that he had sabotaged his own professional standing. In his attempts to solve his money problems, he had destroyed the one source of income he actually had. The social consequences followed swiftly. Word of Daniel's financial troubles had spread through our circle with the speed that gossip always travels among people with too much time and too much interest in each other's misfortunes. What surprised me, however, was how little sympathy he received. "Honestly, Arthur," Patricia Ashford confided during a charity board meeting, Most people are saying Daniel brought this upon himself, making investment commitments before he had actually inherited anything. It shows terribly poor judgment. And that wife of his, Eleanor Richardson, added with obvious distaste. She's been calling people, trying to arrange loans based on Daniel's temporary difficulties, as if anyone would lend money to someone facing bankruptcy. The final social humiliation came when Daniel and Brittany were asked to leave their country club. They had been dining in the club restaurant when the manager approached their table and quietly informed them that their membership had been suspended due to unpaid fees. Apparently, Helen reported with barely concealed satisfaction, Brittany made quite a scene. She claimed that her father-in-law was temporarily controlling the family finances and that payment would be forthcoming. But the manager pointed out that their membership dues had been in arrears for 3 months, well before any inheritance issues. 3 months. Daniel had stopped paying his club fees even before Eleanor's death. He had been so confident about his coming inheritance that he had started living beyond his means while his mother was still alive. The personal toll on Daniel and Brittany's marriage became apparent when Brittany moved out of their apartment and filed for divorce. The official story was that she was visiting family during a difficult time, but the court documents told a different story. Lawrence had contacts in the legal community who kept him informed about high-profile divorce filings, and Brittany's case was making waves. She's claiming that Daniel misrepresented his financial situation when they married, Lawrence informed me. Apparently, she is arguing that she was deceived about his inheritance prospects and therefore should not be liable for debts incurred based on false expectations. Can she do that? She can try. But since they were married when Daniel made most of these commitments, and since she was an active participant in the spending decisions, she is likely to be considered equally liable for the consequences. 6 weeks after the will reading, Daniel appeared at my door looking like a broken man. He had lost weight. His clothes were wrinkled and ill-fitting, and he had the hollow-eyed look of someone who had not been sleeping. "Dad," he said when I opened the door, "can we talk?" I invited him in, noting how he looked around the house, his childhood home, with the expression of someone seeing it for the first time, or perhaps for the last. "You look tired, son. Are you eating?" "Not really. I can't afford groceries. And I lost my job 3 weeks ago." "I heard. I am sorry about that." Daniel settled heavily onto the living room sofa, where he had spent countless hours as a child watching television and doing homework. Now he looked like a stranger in a familiar place. "Dad, I'm here to apologize. This was unexpected." "For what?" "For everything. For treating you like you were incompetent. For dismissing your intelligence. For lying to investors about having $55 million. For trying to sell your house without your permission. For letting Brittany disrespect you and Mom's memory." His voice cracked slightly. "For being so greedy and entitled that I forgot what family actually means." I studied my son's face, searching for any sign of manipulation or calculation, but all I saw was genuine exhaustion, defeat, and what might have been the beginning of actual wisdom. What brought this on? Losing everything. My job, my wife, my home, my future. Realizing that I destroyed my entire life because I thought I deserved something I hadn't earned. Daniel looked around the room again, his gaze lingering on family photographs from his childhood. "I keep thinking about what Mom used to tell me when I was little, that respect is earned, not given. That work builds character. That family loyalty means putting love above selfishness. Do you remember those lessons?" "I remember them. I just forgot how to live them." We sat in silence for several minutes while Daniel composed himself. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet but steady. "Dad, I need you to know that I am not here to ask for money." "You're not?" "No. I made my choices, and I need to live with the consequences. But I am here to ask for something that might be even harder to give." What's that? Forgiveness. And maybe the chance to earn back your respect. I felt tears sting my eyes at the vulnerability in his voice. This was the son I remembered, the child who had been capable of genuine remorse and growth. Daniel, you have always had my love, but you are right. Respect has to be earned. I know. And I know I have a lot of work to do. I've filed for bankruptcy. I'm looking for any job I can find. And I've started therapy to figure out how I became such an entitled person. This level of self-awareness was startling. The Daniel I had known for the past 5 years had never shown any capacity for this kind of honest self-reflection. What about Brittany? Daniel's face hardened slightly. Brittany filed for divorce and is trying to claim that I defrauded her about my financial prospects when we got married. How do you feel about that? Honestly, relieved. I have spent 5 years becoming someone I don't recognize because I thought that was what she wanted. Now I realize she never wanted me. She wanted the lifestyle she thought I could provide. Daniel leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly. Dad, I know this sounds crazy after everything I've done, but losing everything has been clarifying. For the first time in years, I can see clearly. I can see what I became, what I lost, what really matters, and what really matters. Family, integrity, building something through your own efforts instead of expecting it to be handed to you. He looked directly at me. And understanding that you are not just my father. You are an incredible man who deserves respect and appreciation, not condescension and manipulation. I felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the possibility of it. The possibility of rebuilding something real with this man who had once been my beloved child. Daniel, what are your plans now? I'm moving to Denver next week. A friend from college has a construction company there, and he's offered me a job. Manual labor, honest work. I figure it's time I learned what it feels like to earn every dollar, instead of expecting someone else to provide it. That sounds like a good start. Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course. Is there any chance, not now, but someday that I could earn my way back into your life, into this family? Not for money or an inheritance, but just as your son again? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with years of disappointment and the fragile hope of redemption. I looked at this broken man who had once been my precious child, and I saw both the destruction he had caused and the possibility of who he might become if he truly learned from his mistakes. Daniel, do you understand why your mother structured her will the way she did? Yes. She wanted to teach me that entitlement destroys character, that respect has to be earned, and that family loyalty is about love, not money. And do you understand why I have chosen to honor her wishes? Because she was right. Because I needed to learn these lessons, and I could only learn them through real consequences. Daniel stood up, his movements careful and deliberate. Dad, I am going to spend however long it takes becoming the man Mom tried to raise and the son you deserve. I don't know if I can ever fully make up for what I've done, but I am going to try. And if I succeed, if I prove that I have truly learned these lessons, then maybe someday you'll be proud to call me your son again. And maybe someday I'll be worthy of being part of the legacy you and Mom built together. After Daniel left, I sat alone in my living room, contemplating transformation and redemption. The entitled, arrogant man who had dismissed my intelligence and planned to liquidate my life was gone, destroyed by the very greed that had defined him. In his place was someone who might be capable of becoming the person Eleanor and I had tried to raise. But that transformation would have to be proven through actions, not words, through years of different choices, not promises of change. The golden couple who had dismissed my worth and planned to spend my inheritance was no more. In their place was a broken man seeking redemption, and a woman who had revealed her true character so completely that even Daniel had finally seen through her facade. Justice, it turned out, was indeed a dish best served cold, and it tasted exactly like freedom. 3 years later, I stood on the terrace of my villa overlooking the Mediterranean, watching the morning sun paint the French Riviera in shades of gold and azure. The villa had been my gift to myself for my 64th birthday, a stunning 19th century property that I had restored with the same meticulous attention to detail that Eleanor had once brought to her own projects. I had earned this view, this peace, this life, built entirely on my own terms. The past 3 years had been a revelation. Freed from the exhausting drama of managing other people's entitlement and greed, I discovered parts of myself that had been buried under decades of putting everyone else's needs first. I traveled extensively, pursuing interests that had been set aside during my years as a supportive husband and an enabling father. I learned to speak French fluently, studied art history at the Sorbonne, and became an accomplished photographer through sheer determination and daily practice. More importantly, I had learned to make decisions based purely on what brought me joy, rather than what kept other people happy. The transformation had not happened overnight. For the first year, after the will reading, I second-guessed myself constantly. Every piece of news about Daniel's struggles, and there had been many, made me wonder if I had been too harsh, too unforgiving, too willing to let a father's love be overruled by the need for justice. Daniel had indeed moved to Denver and taken the construction job with his college friend. The work was hard, manual labor that left him exhausted at the end of each day, living in a small apartment that consumed half his monthly salary. The bankruptcy had been finalized, wiping out his debts but destroying his credit for years to come. Through it all, he had worked steadily, lived within his means, and slowly begun paying voluntary restitution to some of the creditors who had been harmed by his fraudulent financial representations. It was not legally required. The bankruptcy had discharged those obligations, but according to Lawrence, who maintained discreet contact with Daniel's bankruptcy attorney, my son was determined to make things right through his own efforts. For 2 years, I heard about his progress only through occasional updates from Lawrence and the social network that still kept track of our family's affairs. Daniel had not contacted me directly, had not asked for help or forgiveness or reconciliation. He had simply worked, rebuilt his life one difficult choice at a time, and honored the lesson his mother had tried to teach him. The first letter arrived on the 2nd anniversary of Eleanor's death. It was brief, handwritten, and completely unexpected. Dear Dad, I know I have no right to contact you after everything I did, and I am not writing to ask for anything. I just wanted you to know that I think about you and Mom every day, and that I am finally beginning to understand the lessons you both tried to teach me. I have been working in construction for 2 years now, and I have learned something Mom tried to tell me years ago. There is a dignity in honest work that has nothing to do with how much money you make. The men I work with respect me because I pull my weight and show up every day, not because of who my family is or what I might inherit someday. I have also been paying back some of the people I hurt with my lies and greed. It will take me many more years to make things right, but I am learning that integrity means taking responsibility for your mistakes, not just apologizing for them. I hope you are happy and healthy. You deserve every good thing life can offer, and I am sorry it took me so long to understand that. Love, Daniel. I read that letter dozens of times, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden requests for assistance. But what I found was something I had not seen from Daniel in years: genuine humility and what appeared to be hard-won wisdom. The letters continued, arriving every few months, each one a small window into Daniel's gradual transformation. He wrote about learning to live within his means, about the satisfaction of building things with his hands, about the relationships he had formed with people who knew nothing of his past wealth or family connections. "Working with my hands has taught me something Mom tried to tell me years ago," he had written in one letter. "Success isn't about how much money you have, it's about how much value you create for other people. The houses we build will shelter families for generations. That's worth more than any investment portfolio." Gradually, I began to see evidence of the man Eleanor and I had tried to raise. The entitled, arrogant heir had been stripped away by necessity and consequences, revealing someone who might actually be worthy of respect. The real test came 8 months ago when Lawrence called with unexpected news. "Arthur, Daniel has been promoted to project manager at his construction company. He is now overseeing the building of affordable housing developments for low-income families." "How is that possible? He's only been there 2 years." "Apparently, he has shown exceptional dedication and natural leadership abilities. His boss says Daniel has a gift for managing complex projects and motivating teams. More importantly, he is known for his integrity, something that is rare in the construction industry. And financially, he is living modestly but comfortably. No debt beyond normal living expenses, a small savings account, and a reputation for honest dealing. He has also continued making voluntary payments to his former creditors, even though he is not legally required to do so." 6 months later, another letter arrived. "Dear Dad, I wanted to share some news with you. I have been promoted to project manager at my company, and we are building housing developments for families who otherwise could not afford decent homes. It is the most meaningful work I have ever done." I know this might sound strange coming from someone who once thought success meant accumulating wealth, but I have never been happier or more fulfilled. I wake up every morning knowing that my work makes a real difference in people's lives. I have also finished paying back everyone I could find who was harmed by my dishonesty 3 years ago. It took every extra dollar I could earn, but I have learned that peace of mind is worth more than any luxury. I am not writing to ask for forgiveness or to request contact. I know I destroyed your trust and disappointed you and Mom terribly, but I wanted you to know that the lessons you tried to teach me were not wasted. I am finally becoming the man Mom wanted me to be. Love always, Eric." Reading that letter on my terrace in France, I finally understood that Eleanor's plan had worked exactly as intended. The harsh lesson had stripped away Daniel's entitlement and forced him to develop the character traits that wealth and privilege had prevented him from learning: discipline, humility, the ability to delay gratification, and respect for earned achievements rather than inherited privileges. Yesterday, Lawrence had called with the news I had been both hoping for and dreading. "Daniel would like to see you. Not to ask for anything," Lawrence had added quickly, "but to apologize in person and to show you who he has become. He is coming to Chicago next month for a construction industry conference, where he has been invited to speak about affordable housing development." "What kind of speaking engagement?" "He has been selected as a presenter at the National Conference on Sustainable Housing. Apparently, his projects in Denver have become models for other cities. He has gained quite a reputation as an innovative project manager who can deliver quality housing on limited budgets." "Did you arrange this opportunity?" "No. Daniel earned this recognition through his own work. The conference organizers sought him out based on his professional achievements. What do you think I should do?" "I think you should trust your instincts. You will know within 5 minutes whether Daniel's transformation is genuine or whether he has simply learned to be a more sophisticated manipulator." Now, standing in my French villa, I thought about that conversation and the choice I faced. I could continue my peaceful life in Europe, free from family complications and the potential for disappointment. Or I could return to Chicago and discover whether my son had truly learned the lessons that had cost him everything. My phone rang, interrupting my meditation. Daniel's number appeared on the screen, the first time he had called in 3 years. "Hello, Daniel." "Dad." His voice was deeper than I remembered, calmer. "I hope it's okay that I'm calling. Lawrence gave me your number." "It's fine. I hear you're coming to Chicago." "Yes, for a conference." "Dad, I know I have no right to ask, but would you be willing to see me? I understand if you don't want to, but I would like the chance to apologize properly and to show you who I have become." I looked out at the peaceful Mediterranean, at the life I had built for myself through 3 years of independence and self-discovery. Soon, I would have to decide whether there was room in this life for a relationship with the man my son claimed to have become. "I will be back in Chicago next week," I said finally. "We can meet for coffee." "Thank you, Dad. I promise I won't ask for anything except the chance to prove that I have learned from my mistakes." After I hung up, I continued to watch the sunrise over the water. In a week, I would discover whether Daniel's transformation was real or whether this was simply a more sophisticated version of the manipulation I had endured years ago. But whatever I learned, I would make the decision from a position of strength rather than weakness, independence rather than enabling, wisdom rather than blind paternal love. Eleanor had given me the tools to teach Daniel about consequences and character. Now, Daniel would have a chance to demonstrate whether the lesson had been learned. Either way, I would remain exactly what I had become. Arthur Sinclair, a man who had learned the difference between love and enabling, between family loyalty and financial obligation, between helping and being used. The Queen's Gambit had been played perfectly. Now we would discover what kind of man would emerge from the ruins of entitlement to face the Queen he had once dismissed and disrespected. But this time, I would be holding all the cards, and Daniel would have to earn his way back into my respect, one honest conversation at a time. 3 years ago, Daniel had expected to inherit $55 million and had received 1 instead. Now, if he had truly changed, he might earn something far more valuable. The possibility of rebuilding a relationship with his father based on mutual respect rather than financial dependence. The game was far from over, but for the first time in years, I was looking forward to the next move.